So let me just give a quick outline of what we have ahead just after the short word of prayer. So let's bow our heads for the prayer. Oh Lord Heavenly Father, thank you for the opportunity given us to come before your presence. Lord, we submit this hour that we have into your hands. So we pray that as we sit through the session, your guidance would be with us. You would lead us and strengthen us to be equipped to boldly proclaim the gospel to our friends, colleagues, and our family, Lord. We submit ourselves into your hand. May your name alone be lifted up, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So, as most of you know, I am dealing a bit with COVID. So, in case if you see that I turn my video and mic off, you know why. It's to deal with some cough. Okay, so because of that reason, for today's session, I won't be looking to take up the full hour. I will be trying to cover reasonably the portion and stay within the time limit as much as possible. Um, and as you might have seen in the WhatsApp group, I sent in a Word document, which is a session outline. So which has some questions in there that we'll be looking at today, some of the points on the PowerPoint. So these are things that you can fill in the answer. You can just type it in or take a printout and fill in the answer. And the intent of those session outlines is that even after these sessions are over, it may not be practical to come back and look at these 1 hour recordings of 16 sessions. But you can look at those session outlines and you can make note of the points that you want to remember down the line. So those will serve as your own notebooks, your own class notes, so to speak, to help you down the line later as well. And so that's about basic sort of the idea that I want to give up for today's session. So Stephen, I think we can begin screen share. All right, so what we're looking at is tactical evangelism. So the question is, you read stuff, you learn stuff, but how do you skillfully, gracefully, with respect, tactically, with some sort of a strategy, present the gospel? How do you get into a conversation and make good use of the time that you have? Because it's obvious that we are all not experts in conversations. We are not all expert debaters. So there is a learning curve. So what we're going to cover in today's session is it's more of a practical skill, and the theory part of it is pretty much limited. There isn't too much of in-depth theory, and I will just touch upon that. It's a whole lot focused on the practical side of it. So whatever you see today, whatever you learn today, it's wholly dependent on the practical side of it. How do you apply it? How do you consistently apply it throughout your daily conversations with when it comes to the gospel, talking about apologetic stuff, whatever be that may. So let's see what we cover. So moving on, we are going to cover 3 main points. One is to how to tactically advance your faith. It is one thing to talk about your faith. It is one thing to share what you believe. It's another thing to do that skillfully, to do that with a bit of planning. So that's what we'll cover one bit. The other would be when you get into a conversation, it could be with another person. So there are 2 people talking, or it could be with a couple of people. So there may be 3, 4, 5, 6 people talking. So how do you get in the point that you are driving the conversation? The key thing to keep in mind on why we are focusing on this is that there will be points where if the other person is not really honest, and if he's more cunning, they may try to put words in your mouth, right? And there are a lot of complex topics that we will be talking across with our non-Christian friends. Abortion is a big one. When it comes to issues of sexual orientation, sexuality, that's a huge topic. These are all really hot topics. So if someone can put words in your mouth that you never intended to say, it can derail the entire thing, because it gives a wrong image of you, it gives a wrong presentation of you, and they would shut out whatever you're going to say. So it is a really tricky thing. It's not like you're talking about whether the Facebook metaverse is useful or not. In that, even if someone puts a word in your mouth, you can backtrack, be correct, and move on. And people won't have that much of emotional feelings or attachment to what you may have said. So we need to be sure that we are sort of having the driver's seat control of the conversation, so that we can lead it in a more productive and effective way. And the third bit would be, which is what I'm sure that most of you would be gleaning most from it, is how can we calmly and easily engage with these objections? Right? Because these objections could be of any sort. It could be a statement someone may make. It could be a question someone may ask. It could be a rhetorical punchline. It could be anything. So how do we engage with this without losing control of the conversation, without panicking out, without getting frightened on what we're about to do? So moving on, we will see what is the primary bit of this whole session is, which will be tackling the objection itself. So to just sort of give a backstory on where the resource material for this session is, it is from Greg Cocker's phenomenal book called Tactics, and it's a famous book. I'm pretty sure Jacob Chen here definitely knows about it. And so 2 years back, the second edition of the book came out, and I remember Greg telling me there is 40% more content in it. So the whole focus of that book is basically what I've outlined in the 3 points we looked before, is to help the Christian present the gospel and be in control of the conversation in a tactical way, where you are skillful and you are winsome in your presentation of the gospel. And the whole aim of this session is that down the line, we're going to learn about stuff. We're going to learn about the arguments for the existence of God, about the resurrection in the core module. And so when we get to that point, you learn all of this stuff, but how do you practically apply it in a conversation? So that is where we need not knowledge, but wisdom. We get knowledge, we learn all this stuff, we by heart theories and all of that, but that is knowledge. You need wisdom to deploy it and present it. So that is the primary intent of what we look at. So I will recommend Greg Cocker's book Tactics as the go-to resource on this. Now, moving on, I just want to look at one terminology that is out there, which is the burden of proof. I'm pretty sure that a couple of you are already familiar with this term, burden of proof. The definition is right there on screen. It's basically a burden that the person who is making a claim has. So if I make a claim, and I say that claim is true, false, and I have the burden to prove it. It's basically that. Now, as we look down later, we will see that oftentimes when we are someone, they would make a claim, they would ask us a question, and then expect us to have the burden to prove or disprove what they say. But what it really is that the burden of proof is not a concept that the Christian has. It is a concept that anyone who is making a claim has. So if it's the atheist making a claim or the Christian who is making a claim, well, anyone who makes a claim has the burden to prove that claim. So keeping this very simple concept in mind would sort of give clarity to when you are in the middle of a conversation. Because it's useful to stop there and think and say, wait, who has the burden to prove? Is it me because I am the one answering it? Or is the person who asked that question and made that assertion and made that statement in the first place? Oftentimes we think that suddenly because we are asked, we have the unavoidable burden to immediately jump in and prove. So that's something that normally happens with us when we are in the heat of the conversation. But that is not really the case. Any person in that conversation who is making a claim has the burden to prove. That could be the Christian, that could be the atheist. Now moving on. This is a key bit that I want all of us to remember. This is something that I keep reminding myself. That whatever we're learning in this session, right? This is much practical. This has very much to do on how you do out there in the world. This has very little to do with reading stuff. This has very much to do with thinking on your feet, thinking through in the real life conversation. So which is why you need to be disciplined in applying this tool and you need to be focused in applying this tactic. Now the benefit with this is that, see, when you are in a conversation with someone, it's a matter of thinking through in that dialogue, right? When you have to think through to recollect the answer, understand what exactly the objection is, and then give a response. And what happens in these stages is that you need to pinpoint your thinking game into an area. Now it's sort of like a person going into a boxing match and he knows that he has to punch with power. Or he is absolutely sure of that. He knows for a fact if you wake him at any time of the night, he will say that he has to punch with power in the boxing match. But unless and until he learns a proper way to channel that power, he will not really end up punching with power. Which is why if you see a trained fighter fight, I don't know, MMA fight or UFC fights or something of that sort, you will see that they have a rhythm, a pattern, a style to it. If you take a random guy to punch, Both persons know that power is better. The more power you have, the more deadlier blow you will be. But the person who has no training will simply be flapping around his hands, trying to slap, trying to kick, all over the place. But a trained fighter knows how to channel his power to make sure that he's using that idea that he has to use power into an effective output. So what this tactic does is that it enables us to focus in on certain questions when you're dealing with a conversation, some general questions. What that does is that you now have found a channel to direct your mind working towards it. So now you have inadvertently, even if you don't know much about the topic, you have got your mind to be focused and concentrated on these certain questions. And that is the channel through which you will be able to unpack that objections. That's how you end up thinking clearly and simply. Because else, all you know is that you need to think clearly. You need to think better. You need to answer the question. And it's all over the place. So it'll take you a lot of while and a lot of time down the conversation before you figure something out. But if you apply this tactic, and we're going to look at 3 questions that you can apply in the conversation. If you stick with those 3 questions, what it does is that it provides a channel for you to direct your mental working, your thought process into it, so that you'll be much more accurate and specific in the conversation. And that will clear up the loopholes in their objection, the loopholes in their argument, and will make you much more effective. So let's move on into it. So the first question that we will be looking at is, what do you mean by that? Now, I just want to give a heads up that we're looking at 3 questions. You don't necessarily have to ask the person, what do you mean by that? It could be any form, but this is the gist. The first question that you want to ask the person is basically, what do you mean by that? Now, like I said, it could be a casual conversation. It could be a very formal conversation. So you can ask this question in a casual or a formal way, however you like. But you basically need the gist of the question to be out there. So now let's look further into it, moving on and see what basically it is. So the reason this question is very effective is that most of the time people don't really know what exactly they're talking about. It could be these rhetorical punchline you heard somewhere and they're just unloading of you. But this happens with the non-Christian. This happens with the Christian as well. You know, ideally, we want the Christian to be well aware of what they're talking of, even if it's punchline and stuff. So it could be like off the top of the mind. One example would be Stephen Hawking saying that God is a fairy tale for people afraid of the dark. Yeah, that sounds nice. That sounds as a well statement, something that the audience would clap to. But what exactly do you mean by that? Why do you say that? There's a whole other thing that goes behind it. So Stephen Hawking may have worked through and come to a conclusion, and then he has put it into this catchphrasey sort of phrase. But the atheist that you may be engaging with might have just heard it and is just simply unloading of. So by asking them this question, we're trying to see whether they really understand what they're talking of. So there are 2 things that this question does. One, it does is that it initiates that shift in the burden of proof. Now they're coming and asking us something from the Bible. So we may immediately think that we have the burden to prove so and so. But not really. The person has made the claim, they made the objection, they've asked the question. So we're trying to try and see, okay, what exactly do they mean by that? So we are slowly shifting the burden of proof towards them. And this question is that initiating part. The second thing that this question does is that it reveals the roof. So what do we mean by that? So Greg Oaken points out and says that imagine a house, there is a roof and there are 4 or 5 pillars holding up the roof. So the pillars are the arguments that a person has. The roof is basically what the argument is holding up. The roof is what is actually that they believe in the core of what they want to convey. So we want to try and figure out, this keeping aside the pillars, what is it exactly that they're trying to present? What is it exactly that they're trying to prove? So this question helps us to see clearly what exactly the roof is. What is it that they are really holding on to when they make this objection? If it's a question on abortion, is it their core? Is their core claim that an unborn baby is not human? Is the core claim that unborn baby is not a person? Is the core claim that someone is human only if they have developed heart? Is the core claim that someone is human only if they are independently living, unlike a fetus dependent on a mother? So when they make these other arguments and stuff and make questions, we're not really able to see what is the extent that they are believing at. Now, the moment as I say this, mostly who may have engaged in this conversation, who have read about this stuff, will suddenly get a glimpse of responses that you can give, a glimpse of counter questions and objections that you can ask. But we actually need to get to that point where we really see what is at the core of their point to be able to bring up these ideas and response and stuff. So it shifts the burden of proof towards them and asks them to substantiate what they say instead of us having to do everything. Another thing is it reveals the role. So the key point, we'll look at that a bit later. So now let's move on to the next bit. I hope this much is clear. So this is an example, right? It says God is the result of socio-political evolution. It is mere tales that people have made to control humans. And there was a look at the damage done in the name of religion. So I would ask, okay, what do you mean by that? Because though the sentence sort of makes sense, we sort of get an idea on what they mean. We need to really know what extent do they mean by that. Did they hear it from someone and are they just unloading it? Or did they really think through? Because what do they mean by socio-political evolution? I may have an idea about socio-political evolution. Is that the same idea that they have? Often what happens is that when someone comes and makes a claim or a statement, our mind immediately tries to understand what they mean by that. And we immediately start responding. The issue is, they may not understand it the same way that I'm understanding it. So it turns out that halfway down the conversation, you're confused. Because what happens is that you're talking in a different sense and they're talking about something else. You both start with the same terminology. They might have said something about, God is made of stuff. And they may be an agnostic, not an atheist. But you thought that they're an atheist. So you start responding to them as if they're an atheist. But they're wondering, well, I never said I don't believe there is no God. To me, it's just that I don't know whether there is no God. So why is this person going around this whole line of pointless objections and stuff? But we are far down that line. We have unloaded our, knowledge and the objections and the brilliance that we have on a person to whom it does not relate at all. Now that is blunder, in a debate and all that. But in another sense, in a one-on-one personal conversation, that also has a huge negative impact. And the negative impact is that they will immediately look at us and say, wow, this person just tagged me into one category. They just looked at me, made some sense, and then put me into one category, name tagged me. So then it may become difficult for them to take us seriously. Because they're going to look at us and say, you looked at me and all you saw was one category. You looked at me and you assumed I'm in this one group of people who believe that sort of. And if the person is someone who thinks of themselves as sort of someone who goes against the tide, you will come across a lot of people who will openly say, hey, I don't just blindly believe stuff. I don't think like other atheists think. So they want to identify themselves as someone separate from group. But if you misjudge them or mistag them in the wrong group, then they will look at you and think that you're someone trying to put them into a group that they really don't want to be part of. So now they've got two reasons to not engage with you. One, you mistag them and put them in a group that they really don't want to be, which is one reason they won't want to be in the conversation. The other reason would be they are non-Christian, so they were not really interested in to carry on the conversation. So you see how asking the question of what do they actually mean by that can shed a lot of clarity and help avoid some negative mistakes and some blunder that we may make down the line. A simple question, but it sheds valuable information. And we want to glean information. We want to get information to get a clear picture of what is happening before we jump in and engage with whatever they're saying. Moving on, we will see what are the advantages that this has. 3 advantages. First one, we get to clarify what they actually mean. Very important, as we saw right now. And then we are giving them an opportunity to better present them it. Maybe they said something real quick or something real fast, so they never really got to unpack clearly. So we're giving them the option, we're giving them the space to really explain what they really meant. And this is the place we sort of get a hint at what is the weak point of their objection. We may not have got a better idea, full idea. We've got a bit of a hint on what exactly is the weak point in their objection. So this is basically the first question. What do you mean by that? We've seen how The objectives it accomplishes, it shifts the burden of proof, it reveals the core of what they believe the roof. And we see the three advantages, and we've also seen what it helps us to avoid. Moving on, we look at the second question, which is, how did you come to that conclusion? Again, very simple question, very straightforward. You need not ask it in the same way. Casual conversation, formal conversation, conversation in Hindi, conversation in Bengali, whatever way you can ask it, however it fits it. But this is basically just, how did you come to that conclusion? What are your reasons for believing that? Why are you believing that? Why are you holding on to that? Why are you holding on to this instead of that? Again, there are different ways to ask it. So let's look at further into this question. So this is a place where we really shift the burden of proof onto the other person, where we really tell them that the person who has made that claim, was made that objection, now really has the burden to tell you why they actually made that in the first place. What are the reasons for saying that instead of saying something else? So we really shift the burden of proof towards them. The other thing it does is that it lays bare the objection or the pillars. So they have this core belief, they're holding on to the proof, core of what they have. And they have certain objections or arguments that they have for holding it up. Right? It could be, if you're looking at the example of abortion, if they believe that the unborn baby isn't really human. Okay, that's what they would believe at the core. And the reason that they would give the pillar or the argument for that, or the reason for that would be, they believe that a human is only human, is that human is able to survive independent of any other person. Okay, so fetus is very much dependent on the mother, so therefore that unborn baby isn't human. So we know, asking the first question, what the roof is. They believe that unborn humans are not really humans. Now with this question, we are asking them, why is it that you believe that? And they would give this explanation and say, well, this is the reason. So therefore, an unborn baby is not really human. So now we have a clear picture on what to go after. What is the weak point of the objection? How can we bring down that roof? Well, now we know the pillar. We take off the pillar, the roof comes down crashed, basically it. And for this reason, this question is very critical and very lethal, because it does the major job of shifting the burden of proof to the person. And so they can't walk scot-free. They now have to answer and clear up whatever they meant. Moving on, let's look at that initial phrase. So when someone says something of this sort, the same question that we looked at in the first bit, asking them how did they come to that conclusion is a huge question, because they made a multiple of claims. Claim it's God is something that is made up, and that is the result of socio-political evolution. And they talk about the damage done in the name of religion. So asking them what do they mean, and how did they come to this conclusion? How did you know that there are damage done in the name of religion? What do you exactly mean by that? What are your means of knowing that? Right? And asking how did they come to know that God is the result of socio-political evolution? All of this helps to see clearly what their arguments are. So then we can sort of pick our battles. If we don't really know much about, Freudian psychology or how socio-political evolution works, we need not engage with that. If you know really well about how religion is distinct from Christianity and how the damage that other religions do is not something that affects Christianity, maybe you know about that. So you can pick your battles because you've now seen what basically they are believing and what are the pillars that is holding up what they believe. Moving on, let's look at what are the advantages of the second question. We see clearly if the challenge actually has any weight. So we said in the meeting that sometimes people come with mere rhetoric and stuff. So when we ask them, why do you believe that? That's when we get to see that whether they really actually have any reasons or not for what they believe. So we get to see if the challenge has any weight or if it is mere quibble and rhetoric. The other thing it does is that, and this is very interesting, the moment you ask someone to substantiate what they believe, if they not have really thought it through, what it happens is they toss up the rhythm, because they are in sort of like a juggernaut mode, they're piping one after the other, one statement after the other, one phrase after the other. The moment you ask them to stop and substantiate what they're saying, it throws off the rhythm. So our idea is not to basically, throw them under the bus, get them in a gotcha moment, sort of humiliate them. Our idea is to go engage with the core of what they're saying in the best way possible. So if they're a person who hasn't really thought through what they're thinking, then by exposing the fact that they really don't have much reasons to believe in whatever they believe in or hold whatever holding, we are giving them much more reason to examine whatever we are presenting and see if it really holds water. We are also holding them up to their own consciousness, honesty, to really assess whether they should continue holding on to whatever they were holding. If it's a person who has really thought through and is well understanding of whatever they're believing in, excellent. You will have a very productive conversation. But if not, if it's someone just unloading rhetoric and punchlines and asking this, will throw them off the rhythm and will get you towards a more productive way of engaging with them. And the final bit is that you gain control of the conversation. So they asked a question and they were sort of expecting to lean back and then wait for you to answer and give all the reason. No, you have turned the tables. For as famously said, how the turntables. You have turned it upside down. So now you are making them stand up and give the reasons for what they're believing in, what they're holding on to. So you are now in a control of the conversation. Remember, you're not trying to control the conversation to humiliate them, present them in bad light, put words in their mouth. So our aim is to make sure that the person really knows what they're talking of so that we can have a productive conversation. If the person is mere rhetoric and punchline, you're not going to have a productive conversation. So what we want to do is that we want to really see if the person has really, if they really thought through, excellent, you're going to have a productive conversation. That's good. Right. Moving on, let's look at the third question. And this is sort of the leading question. So this is where your knowledge base actually kicks, right? So right now we've just looked at the way you can win something, and with wisdom, apply these questions. You're asking general stuff. How did you come to that conclusion? What do you mean by that? But by asking the leading question, what you're doing is you're tapping into your knowledge base and you're taking the conversation forward. So let's move on and see what we have. So far, the major burden is off too, right? You've asked these questions, you've shifted the burden of proof, you're in driver seat of the conversation, and the major burden is off you. And like I said, here is where your knowledge of that topic starts kicking in. So again, looking at the issue of abortion, that's where I would turn to medical science to point out, how at the point of conception, that the unborn baby has a unique DNA distinct from the father and the mother. So it's really a hard point to say that even if you have a unique DNA, you're not a human species. You're not a member of the human species. So basically, they would just say, you're not a human being. You're not really human. All that stuff. But my knowledge of what I know about countering abortion kicks in once I really know what exactly they mean by their objection against abortion or their arguments for abortion. So this is a place which is very adaptive and flexible for each one of us. It depends on how much you know about the topic. It depends on how clearly you've been able to see the flaws in their argument. But here is a place which goes, like I said, it's very adaptable. Maybe I may not suddenly tap into my knowledge base. I've asked them, what do they mean by that? I've asked them, how did I come to the conclusion? And I see that they're making, rather incongruent, nonsensical statements. So at that point, maybe I will try and bring them together and say, well, you believe this, then you believe this as well. But you see how you can't have both at the same time. That could be the leading question. Or like I said, I could tap into my knowledge of abortion, medical science, and ask them direct question. That could also be my leading question. So very adaptable. This is the place where your knowledge of the topic kicks in. Now let's look back at that example that we saw earlier. Moving on, we see. So they would say something like, look at how the concept of deities have evolved over time, and you can see how religion is tied to politics and national identity. So at this phase, once I hear this, my idea would be to point them toward certain arguments for both. Because if this is really the case, then you should not expect there to be any proof or any evidence leading towards God in nature or in history or anything of that sort. So I would ask them that, then you shouldn't expect there to be any evidence or proof for God in nature or history. Why is it I'm talking about nature and history? Well, I have the fine-tuning argument in my mind. I have the Kalam cosmological argument in my mind. And I have the case of the historic resurrection of Jesus in my mind. Which is why I'm phrasing this next question in this way to get them on the same plane and then get into these arguments. And you may be a person who knows only the Kalam or only the fine-tuning or only the resurrection, or maybe someone who knows really well about personal experiences, testimony from that. So for you, this may not be the right question. For you, it could be something else. Or maybe you realize that you don't want to tap into arguments. You want to wait and continue working through and dialoguing with them and exposing their flaws before you move further. Again, very adaptable, very flexible, very much depend on us. Moving on. Now here is we're reaching towards the end. So here's a caveat. So far we've assumed that the person we're talking with hasn't really thought through. What if they have really thought through? What if they really know what they're talking of? What if they're really well read on this topic and as well read? Well, it's pretty simple. Be honest, be humble, and say, I don't know, and you can get out of the hot seat. If you don't know something, well, it's pretty straightforward. You just have to admit that you really don't know what you need to say about that, right? Be honest and upfront about it. And you can let them know that, hey, if you got some resource on that, let me know. I will think through, listen through, read through, and maybe we can pick up this conversation later. And this would be a time for you to go through, search some resources, some of the websites out there, check with your friends who these stuff, and then get some more information and come back to the conversation and say, hey, this is what I've read so far. This is sort of what the idea that I've got. What do you think about this? Does this make sense? And get back into the conversation. This is a place where you need to be, this is what I said, you need to be disciplined, because often we will get the urge to simply jump in and give some sort of response when we really don't know what we have to say. But be disciplined, be true to yourself. And above all, what we're trying to do is not trying to sell the person a life insurance policy or something of that sort. Our intent with what we're doing here is pre-evangelism. We're clearing out the intellectual objections that they have to make the path clear for them to come and experience and encounter the gospel in its clarity. So our intent is for them to see the gospel clearly, not for them to roll over and say, wow, you won me over to Christianity. That would be good, but that will not get the whole mission accomplished. Mission is for them to see clearly what the gospel is, so that when they encounter the Holy Spirit, when they encounter the direct touch of God, they would be open towards the interaction of the Holy Spirit and would have as least as possible intellectual objections. So make sure that you're honest and upfront with this, and humble. Takes humility to come to this point and say, because I realized that initially I would feel that how can I step out of the conversation saying I don't know? So I would push forward with some sort of random answers to say that to show that I'm still relevant in the conversation. Sometimes you may get an immediate blink of an idea and you be like, oh, I didn't think of that. And you can get back in the conversation. There may be points where you really have no clue, you really have no idea what they're talking about. If someone talks to me about a special theory of relativity, I don't have any idea about it, apart from the fact that special theory of relativity and general theory of relativity have these words similar at them. So if someone talks about different theories of time and how it applies in this theory of relativity, I would tell them, hey, I don't know. I have a couple of friends who know much about it. I have, as you guys know, Ashish is a physics teacher, so I have Ashish. And my other friends are reasonable faith, so I would say, hey, let me go check with them and see what they say about it. And that would be the best way to move forward with it. And moving on, just a final bit to touch up with. See, the key purpose that we have here is not to thrash someone in an argument. Like I said, we want to win the person to Christ, not win the conversation or the argument. If it's a debate setting, it's a different setting altogether. So people are coming there and waiting, and they're expecting the 3-hour showdown. That's what people are expecting. They would expect you to be humble and having humility and meekness and all of that. But they expect you to come very well prepared and know your answers and not say, I don't know. If in a debate, a debater says, I don't know, that is 100 points to the other guy. But that's a different setting. And most of us will not be getting into a debate setting, a formal debate setting. I don't think so for most of our lives. So we will be engaging with our friends, colleagues, family members on a one-on-one basis. So what we want to do is to be winsome ambassadors. That's what Greg keeps on saying about being winsome ambassadors of Christ. Emulating Christ in our life and being skillful in our conversations. We see that whole image in the Bible of being innocent as a dove and skillful as a snake. Right? No one is asking you to let go of your innocence. You just be more skillful, thoughtful, and strategic in your conversation. It is not strategic to deceive them. It is not being tactical to put words in their mouth. It is not being tactful to catch them in an aha, I've got you moment or anything of that sort, but to present our case better and to expose the flaws in the argument. So make sure that we do not let arguing and winning the conversation go into our head. In fact, Greg actually asks a very high bar of expectation. He says that in that conversation, if one party, either you or the other person, if one party gets angry, the conversation is lost. Now, I would expect him to say that if I get angry, the conversation is lost. Makes sense. I'm a Christian. I have to be humble and meek in my dialogue. But he says that if one party gets angry, the conversation is lost. The reason being, if you are angry, you are not going to think straight. You're not going to think calmly. You are not going to respond properly. So what happens then is that no matter what I say, it is all going to go through over the person's head. They're not going to listen clearly. They're not going to think through clearly, and the whole conversation hence is lost. And finally, connect with them through humility. Be a friend to them instead of being a debater to them. Again, this is pre-evangelism. You are going to talk about the love of Christ and how we are to love our neighbors as ourselves and our Lord as our with all our mind, heart, soul, and strength. Right. So remember that you're going to go take that step towards that step. You are going to be possibly and God willing in a place where you're going to invite them to church, invite them to your meetings. You're going to see a lot more of them, even more. So keep that in mind when we engage in this conversation, that we don't get brash and harsh with them. I know different settings and social media settings may not allow us, unfortunately, to be humble and meek and amicable, but we cannot lose sight of the principle. We cannot lose sight of what we're called to do. And the final thing is, do not overuse the tactic. Don't get into a conversation and keep on asking these first two questions over and over and over and over again. It does not take the conversation forward. Right? If you don't know, after asking two questions, you have no clue on this, just say that. Well, I don't know much about this. Let me go read up, ask some friends, and come back and pick up the conversation later. But do not overuse the tactics. Don't just keep on asking, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? Does not take the conversation forward. Remember, these questions are tools for us to help take the conversation forward. These aren't go-to, must-do stuff for us to do. There's no necessity on you that you must ask these questions in this order or anything or that. If you ask in this order, it's great. It's a simple way to remember as such. If you ask this question later, it's really great. But you need not ask this question over and over again. If you start the conversation, you have a really good idea on what that person means, and they've already in the previous conversation told you why they believe that, then you need not ask these questions over again. So do not overuse the tactic. If you're stuck in the conversation, well, get out of the conversation, do some homework, and come back in it. Right? There's no pressure on you to keep asking this again. And do not patronize the other person. Don't try to, be too humble and too meek. Because if they feel that you're trying to make a mockery of them, or they feel that you're trying to, be over sarcastic, then that will change the whole tone of the conversation. Right? You can add skillfully some sarcasm to highlight a point, to clear up a flaw in their argument and as such. But be sure that you don't overuse, that you're not over patronizing or anything also. Be genuinely humble. Because the fact that you're going to be skillful and tactical in your conversation. So they may have an impression that you're trying to, like I said, get them in the aha moment, get them in the gotcha moment. You made a mistake, I got you, I've, made bare what you've said. So they may feel that you're trying to do that and humiliate them. They may get that sense. So be very careful that you are really honest and upfront and humble in your dialogue. So they don't think that way. Because then it will be really hard for them to open up to the gospel. And the final bit, I know it's going to be a bit cheeky statement, but you would rather be someone who's willing to lose an argument than a friend, because they can pick up a book, an article, a video, a lecture, and be convinced by that argument. But it's not really possible for them to build up a friendship again with someone through a book, an article, or a video. So be sure that you're working to stay within that friendship. That if you lose this conversation today, that's fine. You maintain that friendship, come back again next time, because you're driven by love to see them brought into the fall of Christ. You're driven by love to see them come to acknowledge the love that God has for them. So because of that fact, you want to maintain a relationship with them rather than give into the argument and lose with that argument. And that's basically it. So if you've got any questions or anything of that sort, we can open up for some time of Q&A. And thankfully, I thought I would be able to push through only for 30 minutes of talk because of the cough. Praise God, we've done 43 minutes of it. So yeah, I think Stephen, you can stop sharing. And if you've got any questions or anything of that sort, we have time now to you can put it in the chats or unmute and ask. Okay, so I guess it's pretty clear because, like I said, the theory bit of the material is pretty straightforward, pretty simple. It all comes down to a strict discipline and focus infused application of it. So that's basically, so I guess if no one has any questions, I'm just going to go and stop the recording. So again, any questions, anything that you want me to go back and clarify? Nope. Okay. Oh. Well, the importance is that, well, basically you, like I said, you want to be skilled in the way you present the content. So you will have all the knowledge in the world, but if you don't really know how to present it, then you will lose out on the other person. I mean, the biggest place where we see this importance of being tactical is in the debate. The person may be an expert, they may have PhD in it, but if they don't really know how to navigate the other person's objections, how to clearly see the other person's objection, they may end up doing some classic mistake like, um, uh, uh, we're misrepresenting the other person, or they may deviate from the topic and do a rendering fallacy or anything of that sort. So the key importance is that we are trying to present why we believe what we believe. So when we try and do that, there would be the other person who has some other reasons for believing something else. And if you're not able to clearly understand what they believe and take out those objections and those arguments, it would be really difficult for us to push through what we are trying to say, present through what we are trying to say. So the importance of tactical conversation in apologetics is very much visible. It's clearly out there. There are a wide variety of tactics. So in Greg Cocker's book also, this tactic of asking questions and stuff, it's what he calls the Colombo tactic. So there are other some stuff. Where one he calls the road scholar. So that is basically, someone's in a conversation, they're just giving you a list of, we're calling right. They're just giving you a list of people who have some experts who have said this and that. So you're going to stop them and say, ma'am, and here's what it says: just the facts, ma'am. You're going to tell them, I don't want the whole list of experts. I just want you to give me the facts. So he presents them it as a one of another tactic. And there's another one tactic he uses, which he calls sibling rivalry. It's not exactly a tactic, but a key to keep in mind, where a person affirms something A and then believes something B. Now the issue is you can't have both at the same time. So it's sort of like a sibling rivalry. You can't have one on the other. Then there's another one called infanticide, where basically that a person holds to position A, and that is dependent on a larger idea B. The issue is the idea B is of the nature that it destroys idea A. So maybe a quick example would be like an atheist saying that there are an atheist saying that there are objective moral values and claims. So someone who's saying that there are objective claims. Now they're an atheist, which is their broader position. They believe there is no God. And they're holding on to another thing which says that there are right and wrong which are applicable to everyone across all time and all place. Now, because of the fact that they're holding to that statement that there is no God, that itself is chipping away at their position that there are objective moral claims. So these are different other tactics or few lines that he keeps in mind in the book to work through. But this tactic itself, the Colombo tactic and the one that we look to it is plenty to use and deploy. And these tactics actually help you to see whether there is a sibling rivalry, whether the position that they're holding are clashing, or whether one position, eats up the other position. Like a person who's saying that there is no objective ground, then saying that morality is objective, is actually chipping away at the branch that they're sitting. So those would be the other tactics sort of that Greg would touch upon. But I would say the Colombo tactic is itself a tool in itself because of the fact that you have to consistently be disciplined and focused in applying it. Which is why I would like for all of us to focus in on this one tactic. Because even though it's simple, the fact that you may end up forgetting to use this and apply it in your conversation, you would be rash, you would run headfirst into a conversation and make a whole mess of it. Which is why I've learned over the time that remembering these three questions itself would help clear the air a lot. I hope I answered the question. So, any other questions or anything else? Well, there is a second edition of the tactics. So that has Greg saying, and Greg said that has 40% more content than the original one. Now, the original one itself is a brilliant book, and the second book came out with 40% more content. So I would say that would be the go-to book. But another book to that you can refer, and I know given Jacob's reading habit, this would be right up your alley, would be Philosophical Foundations for a Christian Worldview. So that gets you up to pace with core elements of philosophy, with laws of logic and as such. As you know, these are all very important things to use in understanding worldviews and concepts. So that would be another, you know, book that is into the next level, dealing into philosophy, written by Dr. Craig and J.P. Moreland. So, Philosophical Foundation for a Christian Worldview, it is written by Dr. J.P. Moreland and Dr. William Lane Craig. So, brilliant authors, brilliant philosophers, brilliant apologists. So that is a good book to turn to, which would equip you with the skills and tools. The Koukl. Koukl. Yeah. So again, any questions, doubts? Yeah, and if there's something that you want to add on from your personal life or some from conversation, that's also fine. Because the one key thing is that the people that we have here joining in this Zoom is very limited, very you know, very selective, because we want that interpersonal dialogue and exchange to happen. Is there anything that you want to add on to mine, or if you've seen that some sort of a personal experience that you want to share about your conversation, that's also fine. So that's also open to anyone.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think what Jacob has said here is like very important questions, and it's very connected to each other in the sense that what it does is it tries to bring you both to the same page in terms of understanding. Because even personally for me, in a lot of college evangelism, the main issue is that we're not on the same page and we're not understanding what we each other are telling each other, right? And the problem is when it comes to these sort of differences. Now, Jacob in the beginning, he had talked about, it's not like your typical discussions where you're talking about like the Facebook metaverse or something that's like a more general topic conversation. This is more about a fundamental belief about existence, about this sort of thing. It is a fundamental belief. So when it comes to that, they will automatically come in to win. They are coming in with a mind of retaliation. So what these questions do, I feel, is that it will bring them to discover the truth along with you, instead of having them to keep on wanting to put in their word in and try to retaliate as much as possible. And the problem is, if we try to misrepresent their position by not using these questions, what happens is they will retaliate even more. Because in the end, what you're doing is you're just saying that what you're saying doesn't matter in that sense. So yeah, thank you, Jacob, for the good questions.
Yeah, that was really helpful. If anyone else want to add anything on that, also we have a couple more minutes. Jacob, if there's anything you want to add, and there are some other people in here who are attending, other apologetics training programs also. So if there's anything that you want to chip in to add, and we have, I think about 8 minutes left. Um, or if there's any interesting observation that you made. So Ankit pointed out that I have the price tag still on my cup. I'm noticing it now. So if there's any sort of those interesting observations that you made also, you can chip in with that. Okay, so I guess that is it. So I'm just going to go and stop the recording.